Welcome to Syntax. Today we have a great one. We're talking Nuxt and Nitro with Daniel Roe. It's going to be really awesome because Wes and I have just about zero knowledge on some of these things. I go occasionally to the Nitro website or even the UnJS website and I look around and say, oh, wow, there's a whole lot of stuff here. So hopefully, Daniel, you'll be able to demystify all of these things and more for us. So Daniel, welcome to the show.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. We this is by popular demand. We've had a bunch of suggestions over the years to have you on, and on Blue Sky recently, everyone's like, have Daniel on, and it's funny, like we crossed paths at one of the conferences. What conference was that? A couple of months ago. GitHub Universe. You were at that one as well?
That's right. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. There was another conversation I had with someone at the Syntax meetup there that yielded a ski trip. It was super cool. So I mean, this is clearly was the meetup to be at. So just a word of advice to anybody: if you see a Syntax FM meetup in your city or at a conference, you should just go. And who knows what will happen? Skiing, podcasts.
We filled that pizza place. There was like a good amount of people in there. We just totally kicked everyone out pretty much.
Brought all
just
the
filled
devs
up the entire
in San
restaurant.
Francisco together.
I'm still having good dreams about that pizza. That pizza was so good. I've never had that. What was it? What kind of pizza was it again?
Well, it's going to actually make me not upset. It's Detroit style pizza, but it's not really Detroit style pizza. That pizza was good. I'll tell you that because I was trying to explain this to my wife. The pizza was good. But it's like if somebody made Detroit pizza by like playing a game of telephone, because everybody there was like, "Oh, how is this? Scott? How does this hold up to the real thing?" And it's like, yeah, it's not really close, but it was
Scott's
still
from
delicious.
Michigan, so he knows the legit stuff. Yeah, it was good.
Yeah, it was good.
All right, so Daniel, introduce yourself. Who are you? What do you do? All that good stuff.
I'm a full-time open source contributor, so I lead the team maintaining Nuxt, which is a framework for building full-stack web apps. I didn't create it. I joined the core team a few years ago and started leading it in January 2024, I think, just after the release of Nuxt 3. I also have some other open source projects I'm involved in, but before that, I really had probably a totally random career path, not one that you would expect would end up in full-time open source, which is what I'm doing now. But yeah, so I've done lots of different things.
That's awesome. And you also work on Nitro, which is the server toolkit. It's part of UnJS. Exactly.
So Nuxt is a bit like Next.js, but for Vue.
Yeah.
So it was released the day after it, back sometime quite a long time ago. It was created by Sebastian and Alex Chopin, and just by the name, you can tell it's going to be an amazing framework, right? You feel like, the Chopin brothers have created this. It will be melodic. It will be incredible. They grew up in the Pyrenees, which is where the mountains of the Nuxt logo comes from. So very, very homebrewed. And but we rewrote it totally from scratch for Nuxt 3, and which was, by the way, a very interesting experience to do on an open source project. I don't necessarily recommend it, but one of the things that we did was rewrite it for a serverless world, and for the idea of a potentially non-node world. So what about other runtimes? At the time, really, it was only Cloudflare. Since then, we've had Bun and Dino, and who knows. In doing that, we rewrote what was originally, we called it Nuxt Sigma. And Nuxt Sigma was our rethought Nuxt server. And then we as part of the whole process, we decided, actually, rather than building parts of Nuxt, why don't we go the true open source way and make them small, composable, reusable packages that can be built on by other people? I always think, personally, that it might take longer to collaborate and work with other people to build something, but you always go further. You always build something that's better. And so that's what we've been trying to do with Nitro, which is originally the server engine for Nuxt, but now it has a considerably broader scope. It powers TanStack Start, Solid Start, Analog, which is an Angular meta framework, and I hope it will power others. because a lot of us meta framework authors and even people who are just building their own APIs, we have similar needs. We want to deploy to lots of different providers. We want to work on different runtimes. And rather than invent these things over and over and over again, it's better to have a common base where we all pitch in and can talk about our goals. So that's what Nitro is. It's the brainchild, I should say, of Puya Parsa, who was the previous team lead of the Nuxt core team, and who now spends his time focusing on this UnJS GitHub org you mentioned, which is dedicated to all of these packages that we created to be part of a broader ecosystem, not just for Nuxt. And I hope that's what they are.
Yeah. So that answers a lot of my questions. Like, what came first? Was it like Nitro that came first and then Nuxt? But it seems like you said, it was originally Nuxt Sigma. And you mentioned UnJS being this collective of different compatible packages and various things. So we have Nitro, which is part of UnJS, but what's the connection there to Nuxt, or is there a connection?
So I think other than the story of us wanting to take some of the things that we're building that we needed to build Nuxt into a place where they could be used more broadly. So I could tell you stories about lots of those libraries, but apart from the origin of many of them, there is no one-to-one connection. A lot of people contribute to UnJS who have nothing to do with Nuxt. The UnJS libraries are used in lots of places that are not related to Nuxt. For example, they're used in Tailwind CSS. Jitty is used to run, to parse the Tailwind config file. It's a very specific purpose. It's something we needed also. So it's used to parse the Nuxt config file, like to execute TypeScript, CJS, MJS, all these different possible extensions in a straightforward way without any dependencies. And so it does that very well for Nuxt. It does that for Tailwind, and hopefully in other places too.
So many. The whole UnJS ecosystem is so cool. I did a talk at a conference a couple of months ago about all these different runtimes. Like we have, you said, like there's Bun and Dino, but then there's Cloudflare, and like Cloudflare a couple of months ago announced like 98% Node.js compat, and it's because of one of the UnJS packages called unenv, which just essentially polyfills all of the Node APIs so that they just work everywhere. And there's just like a massive set of primitives that are allowing people to build amazing things. Like you look at Tanstack Start, is a small team of developers are able to create something that rivals Next.js because they're like standing on these massive projects like Nitro.
I mean, I think that's the whole joy of open source, isn't it? That you basically, zooming back a bit, it was the Unix philosophy to have all these little programs that sort of worked and you could chain them together. I don't know if you're a sort of Linux user. I should know that, but I'm not sure I do.
I'm not, but we get it. It's the do one thing and one thing well, right?
Yeah. And I think, there's so many projects that do this well these days, like Vite, for example, which is omni-capable. They could have gone in a very different direction. They could have gone in the direction of being like the bundler, like the framework, and they didn't. They chose to work really well with a lot of teams building on top of Vite. And, I think when you see that, when it's like maintainers and packages, libraries, welcome collaboration and contribution and lift, each other up, then you really get this wonderful sort of ecosystem benefit that you're talking about. So, Tanstack Start hopefully is able to get going a lot faster because they don't have to reinvent the wheel. Hopefully that means they can also give it their own flavor, with the router and, the amazing stuff Tan is doing with types and, and make something that's very cool very quickly.
I'm wondering about with UnJS, like what makes something an UnJS package specifically, rather than just like a miscellaneous Node or JavaScript package?
That's a good question. And I should say that the best person to talk about that would be Puya.
Yeah, I've been DMing with him. We're gonna have him on because he's next level.
He is. He's great. Puya's great. I think the kind of things that we look for are things that are universal. So anything that is highly specific to Node, for example, is probably not an UnJS package, because we want something that will be runnable everywhere. That doesn't mean it can't have a specific Node implementation, but we use the Winter CG now, renamed to a slightly different name. We use the sort of universal keys for the different runtimes, which means that we can have packages which run equally well in lots of different ones. So it doesn't mean you can't be specific, but we do try for things to be universal. I think there's a strong focus on trying to reduce the number of packages. So I, for example, have currently 3 font-related packages in UnJS. And actually, I'm going to try and merge those into a monorepo, because it feels like it's starting to get a little font heavy. So things that somehow are universal, somehow have a sort of adapter pattern for easy extensibility, or a sort of coming up with a generic API, that's also a good indicator. So for example, Unifont allows you to connect any font CDN and get font data back. So it's something that can be used by a font integration. And I think another good question would be, is this an essential building block for a framework? Might be another thing. So I think the idea of something being essential or a key building block for building other things on top of that's what I would say. But obviously Puya he'll give the full and authoritative answer on that.
Totally. So there's nothing that makes Nitro, let's even say Nitro specifically, there's nothing preventing anyone from just picking up just Nitro and using just Nitro by itself, right?
No, absolutely not. Nitro itself does use quite a few of the other packages under the hood, like unenv, for example, was originally created to enable Nitro to build servers for Cloudflare, for example, or other non-Node environments. There was even, I'm not even sure this exists anymore, but there was even an experimental preset, worked quite well, that allowed you to build a server for a browser service worker. So as soon as the browser service worker was installed, you had server rendered HTML from the browser.
Yeah. From the browser,
Which you might say to me, why? Why would you do that? And the answer is because it was there as a possible target. So yes, Nitro uses these things under the hood, but really, if all you need is to create a quick API, you don't need any framework, you don't need any integration, I absolutely would pick Nitro up. It is fast and has a lovely, very ergonomic approach, and it's fully type safe end to end. So you get a lot of nice things out of the box. So that sounded a lot like a sales pitch.
No, that's good.
No, I would definitely use Nitro, is what I'm saying.
Yeah. And so Nitro, I mean, like you said, it comes with a lot of stuff out of the box. And I guess we can get into some of those things, because there's a key value storage, there's a SQLite, there's tasks and WebSockets. What is the goal for including things, and where do you see it going with what will be included in Nitro?
So one of the inspirations for me, for Puya, and some of the other members of the team are frameworks like Laravel, for example, which have this beautiful story of integration, where things are very thoughtfully laid out, where you have adapters to hook into different providers, for example, different authentication providers, different databases. And so Laravel gives you everything you need to build a server-rendered app or API. And Nuxt originally started as really a front-end framework, which had server rendering. So you had some server components to that, but there was it wasn't really a full stack framework, because although you could do some things in those server routes, things like authentication, databases, KV, there'd be a lot of things that were missing from that. And so I think that's what we're looking for Nitro to provide, is everything that you would need to build a full stack app. For Nitro to provide all of the backend that you need, and then a framework like Nuxt or 10-stack start to provide all of the front end and backend integrations on top of that you would need. So I think I would like to see that you don't need anything else besides Nitro. Obviously, you can always decide, hey, we're not going to handle the WebSocket stuff ourselves. We're going to use this provider for that. We're not going to handle the notification levels. We're not going to handle the cron jobs. We're going to do something else for that. But Nitro should provide integrations in a provider agnostic way for all of these things, which of course is the aim. So the tasks API, for example, it's still quite early days. Platforms like Cloudflare provide cron syntax, so triggers, so you can have tasks that run sort of in parallel there. Targets like AWS also have the idea of background tasks that can run. So figuring out the right API to make that work seamlessly across all the deployment targets, some of which don't have support, that's the tricky thing. I mean, the whole concept is no lock-in, right? So the whole thing that Nuxt is about as well is we are, we're built by the community. We are independent. I want to have a great integration story on every provider. People often ask me, what's the best place to deploy Nuxt? And if my answer is any one provider, then I'm really failing at my job, because the whole aim is that the thing that limits or directs people to deploy somewhere should be the feature set of that deployment provider, rather than something in Nuxt that directs people one way or another. Getting that right isn't always easy, because zero configuration is the best possible experience, for example. But then there's always pros and cons. So for example, some providers support image optimization as a native primitive, which is great, but often there's a cost associated with that. So on the Nuxt level, for example, we have our Nuxt image integration. What is our zero config deployment strategy for people? And how do we look after and give people good defaults so they don't end up with massive bills, but still have great sort of integration with providers? So we have to juggle that and figure out what the best choices. But yeah, we want to be working lots of places and working really well. One of the things I love is that wherever we have this provider pattern, I've mentioned that, it means for something like Nuxt fonts or Nuxt image or Nuxt scripts or Nitro itself, you can say, we want this preset. I want to use Cloudinary, or I want to use, Bunny fonts or whatever. But you can also write your own. You just can provide a path to your own implementation. And we try and make it easy to write those as well. And that's often a way people can build their own integration and then later make a PR to Nuxt or Nitro or whatever, because extensibility is really something I'm looking for whenever I use a platform. I mean, if it's zero config for me, that's better. But if it isn't, and I want to do my own thing, I want to be able to do that.
Can I ask you to get a little bit opinionated about some of these places to deploy something? Because let's say I ask you to build a full stack app. You need server JavaScript, you need obviously front end, you need images, maybe you need a key value store, and you're going to need a database. There's lots of different ways you can go about it, right? You can build your own with AWS. You can go all in on like the Cloudflare versions of all of that. You could just deploy the whole thing to Vercel. There's lots of different avenues to go at, and they all have their ups and downs. And I'm curious your opinion on these types of things, because some people are like, oh, just stick with Node and it will be fine, and just deploy it to a regular old server. And a lot of people are like, just everything on Vercel. It's a little bit more expensive, but I don't want to have to mess with it. If you were building an app today, what would you choose?
You're asking if I am building an app today.
Yeah.
So a full-time open source maintainer is building a side project. And that is going to give you a different answer to if I am launching a startup on a thing. It's not a side project, it is what I'm doing. And it's going to give you a different answer if I'm leading an established team. And so, but because a lot of these platforms, and I'll go into this, I'll get opinionated, but it really does matter. And I know you know this, but for example, I love hardening Linux VPS. It's so much fun. But the moment I've hosted websites for clients, I've maintained their service for them. And let me tell you, there is something about being on call and knowing that if their website goes down, I have to fix it, and I have to fix it ASAP. That means that I appreciate the serverless offerings and the whole concept of that, because it might be more expensive, but I absolutely value not being the one on the line when the website is down, right? So picking serverless, just as an example, I almost always, I almost always would, but I pick that because I don't want to have to think about the server, because I've been there. I know how to do it. I'm fully able to do that, but I don't want to. I want to. I want to have peaceful evenings. Like I don't. So yes, I can absolutely host everything in a $5 VPS, and I'd be fine. But I'm not going to pick that for either my side project or my startup or my established company. Like I'm picking something that lets me scale and lets me have a good night's sleep. I'm picking something probably, if I'm starting from scratch, that has really decent billing and caps. I don't want worries. I've never had an issue, by the way. I've been on hobby tiers for Vercel and Netlify and Cloudflare. Zero. Maybe you say that's just Daniel because you've not been very successful. That might be the case.
That's the hack. But, don't build good stuff.
Exactly. I wouldn't go all in on Vercel's platform. What I found was that I very, very quickly exceeded their free tier on stuff like the analytics. So it was a beautiful dashboard, but I mean I'm talking my personal blog, and I don't get income from that. I just want to know, are people visiting it or not? And so there was no way I'm paying pro fees for that. So I first self-hosted a Plausible, which Plausible is amazing. And I only self-hosted it after I ran out of their free tier as well. So I might have a problem in general with analytics. And then I moved to Cloudflare Analytics, which ended up being sort of more affordable. But again, these are the sorts of decisions that a lot of people aren't like. A company's not going to care about that level of cost, whereas I'm caring about it just because of who I am. I'll tell you, Cloudflare is a very attractive proposition right now because of the insane cost value, value of their services. Yeah. The DX of their dashboards is really quite poor.
Yeah.
And I feel like there are times when I would be employed by Cloudflare. When you go in, you're like, I'll take a job, I'll fix the things, and then I'll leave. I feel like I would do that for some things. Why? And I'm just going to go on a little rant. If anyone from Cloudflare is listening, please fix this. Every time I click, I have a Cloudflare Pages site or something is deploying on GitHub. It says, view logs, view build logs. Okay, I think, I'd like to view those build logs. Click. I have to log in again. Somehow, the login I had earlier today is no longer valid. I log in again. Okay, two-factor authentication. Okay, I'm finally in. Now it asks which account I want to view the logs through. You should know this. I've clicked a direct link to view the logs. And once I select it, then it takes me to them. But I feel like I shouldn't have to do this. I have had to do so much clicking just to view these logs. Something like Vercel, they have nailed DX.
Yeah, totally.
Vercel are incredible. I mean, whoever is in charge of that team, whoever is involved in that team, they should be patting themselves on the back because it doesn't get smoother. It really, really does. I haven't used a single platform, I think, that is not a better experience from the point of view of dashboards, of logs, of everything. It is just gorgeous. And I've used Vercel for my personal website for years, and it's until recently, and I just think it's amazing.
Yeah. Sorry. One thing I want to say real quick is I'm very much on the same page as you with the very bullish on Cloudflare. And somebody who said on Twitter the other day that with Cloudflare you pay with your time, which is often true. There's just these random things come up.
So
You're like,
true.
how do I approach this? And it's always a little bit different, and then the Vercel, it just works, And I'm trying to put a Next.js app on Cloudflare right now, which is working fairly well. But of course, you pay with your time a little bit.
Yeah, I don't think I'd be able to set up a Cloudflare tunnel without some sort of step-by-step guide. Like just clicking through the UI. Like, I want to do this. Let me click through it. No, you just never be able to figure out where you're supposed to click or what you're supposed to do. And overall, the Cloudflare dashboard is largely
they're very receptive to it as well, though. Every time I've got a minor ache or pain, I send a little screen recording over to somebody, and they're very very responsive to it. So anyway, sorry, go ahead, Daniel.
No, I totally agree. They are. And I think sometimes things like this, people encounter DX problems with AWS as well, for example. And I'm guessing both AWS and Cloudflare have a similar cause, which is that they have empowered teams to act as almost independently. So they can move quickly, they can build stuff out, they're in charge of their own fragment of the dashboard, which has the negative potential consequence of stuff doesn't necessarily integrate that well, because it's not driven from I'm speculating. I don't know how Cloudflare is sort of made up internally until I get that job and, try and do the stuff that I want to do. And I might discover it's a little harder than I think.
Yeah, right, yeah.
But I wonder if part of it is that. And sometimes maybe it's the consequence of having the velocity at the team level. So Nuxt Hub, which by the way is not it's not Nuxt, it's a separate company, also started by the creator of Nuxt, has created that. And he's basically building, if you ever used Laravel Vapor, which the serverless, it basically integrates with your AWS, or at least when I used it, integrates with your AWS account, configures it for Laravel, and then gives you like a dashboard view of it and manages the deployment. But it's still your account, and it still uses resources on your account. So Sebastian and his team have built something very similar for Cloudflare for Nuxt and Nitro projects, which actually also works with like Solid Start and TanStack Start as well. So I wouldn't be surprised to see maybe a rename coming, because it feels like it's maybe more Nitro Hub than it is Nuxt Hub. But anyway, he's building that, and I think that kind of thing, or if someone wants to do this something more generic, there's just sort of a wrapper around Cloudflare that basically gives you a better DX. That kind of thing, I think, would make a killing, because it's using the primitives that are there. It's using the API that's there, but it's giving you the integration, it's giving you the seamless flow that Cloudflare isn't. I mean, it's also a very risky strategy, because if Cloudflare improve things, people might not see the need for it.
Yeah,
so
AWS has not done that though. We always wonder, like, why does AWS not just make a Vercel? Like, why don't? And that's the thing we want. We want Cloudflare to be the like raw cost of AWS, but we also want it to be the Vercel experience.
And it's worth saying that the whole you pay with your time thing, it's a reason why you might not go for the thing that is technically the lower cost. Mm-hmm. So I mean, I've worked with teams that are building Next.js sites, deploying on Vercel. I have recommended Vercel to companies in that kind of situation because of the seamless flow. People understand how it works. They find debugging super easy. The preview deployments and the ability to add comments to them, it all works really, really well. And the velocity you can get with that is worth quite a lot. People say, the markup is twice as much, or whatever it is. But it's not about necessarily raw numbers. I mean, there's a lot going in. You pay developers quite a lot as well. It's not a costless endeavor.
And if you want to see all of the errors in your application, you'll want to check out Sentry at sentry.io/syntax. You don't want a production application out there that, you have no visibility into in case something is blowing up and you might not even know it. So head on over to sentry.io/syntax. Again, we've been using this tool for a long time and it totally rules. All right. It is interesting, but Cloudflare is so cheap. Have you checked out SST at all?
I have, yes. So it was, again, much like, by the way, I got the impression, I'm sure this isn't what you meant, but I got the impression that basically you've been resisting having me. You've been like, we don't want to have, people are asking that. They shouldn't get Daniel on the show, and then basically your hand was forced at the last minute by Blue Sky.
Oh,
that's what I'm
no,
thinking,
no,
that is not accurate. That is not accurate.
Yes. Requests to come on the podcast is we have a bazillion of them, and we have to balance them because sometimes we have guests lined up for 2 months straight, and we're like, oh man, we kind of overdid it.
Well, basically, people were doing the same for us with SST. So people were saying, when will Nuxt come for SST? When? Why is Nuxt not available for SST? And so it was Dax and I basically had a very long running back and forth on when Nuxt would come to SST. But it's now shippable on SST. So I know it. And SST I've seen the sort of back and forth in terms of the underlying infrastructure and how it deploys. And obviously, I have a lot of time for Dax's brand of humor, which I find really funny.
Yeah, he's a good fellow.
Yes. So yeah, I've come across SST, but I guess sorry, you were saying something about it.
Oh no, I'm just relevant to our conversation about
yes,
deployment
about where you
infrastructure.
deploy.
Yeah.
So SST, interestingly, it's sort of a little different from a lot of the providers because, so for example, we have like an AWS Amplify provider where everything is at the underlying level, and you have image optimization and Lambda and CDN and so on. And the same is true for Netlify and all of the. We've got so many. I had 30 plus providers, I think.
Wow. Jeez.
And for most of those, Nitro, Nuxt, is responsible for producing an output that gets consumed directly by the provider. And so Nitro will say, hey, these are the CDN assets, and this is a JSON file with information on how to configure the image optimization, and this is the server endpoint. This is how you're going to render stuff, and everyone has different output formats. So Cloudflare, also needs a JSON with rewrites, so you don't have a .html at the end of any pre-rendered routes that you have, for example. And so there's lots of stuff that happens behind the scenes to give a zero config actual final deployment, meaning users don't have to have a Netlify TOML file. They can set for example, they can set their headers and their redirects in a Nuxt format, and it will work whether they deploy to Vercel, it produces a Vercel.json, or Netlify, it produces like an underscore headers, underscore redirects, or whether they deploy to Cloudflare, it actually also produces underscore headers, but a different format. But so they have all of these slight tweaks. The thing about SST is that rather than Nuxt and Nitro being the thing that generates all the config for that provider, it is like a part of a config which the user is writing instead. So it's a different level. So it's not really it's not operating in the same way as the other providers. Mm-hmm. So it basically slightly reduces the scope of Nitro in that, and Nuxt in that context. They can do less, so they're slightly less capable. But on the other hand, the user is doing that, so it will therefore involve more configuration from the user, which is why I wouldn't necessarily go straight for that. Not meaning anything negative about the target or about SST either, which I think is really exciting. But it reduces Nuxt and Nitro a little bit, I think, in terms of the capability.
So Nuxt started off as like a Next.js for Vue.js, like you had mentioned. But that was a while ago, and it's 2025, and it does feel like they've diverged a bit. What makes Nuxt better in 2025?
So for a start, we definitely have diverged. We're definitely different. And I'll tell you what I love about Nuxt that is not there for Next. But I do think Next is also a good framework. So
tell me why you hate Next.js.
Exactly. So this is the real reason. I think Nuxt has an amazing community. So it's very much community built and led. So we don't have a VC-backed company sort of driving the direction of where Nuxt goes. The direction of Nuxt comes from the community. And so it matters a very, very great deal. We're smaller than Next, I think, because Vue is smaller than React. We're still pretty big, but it means we have a slightly different feel in terms of what the people who are involved in the project are like, and the difference that people make to where we go as a project. We're also very, very customizable and extensible. So Nuxt has the concept of modules. So you can basically add anything or do anything to Nuxt, either in your own project or by creating a reusable module. We expose hooks at every stage of the build process. Almost everything is swappable. Even the bundler, we use Vite by default. You can use Webpack, you can use RSPack. And so there's lots and lots of scope for customization. We have, even at the level of types or really anything, you can do almost anything with modules, which means we have a whole library of over 200 modules that people have created. That's all in an API. You can add your own module to the list. People can discover it and use it. I think that's pretty unique with Nuxt. I haven't come across a framework that has a similar kind of thing. We also have a very, very strong ecosystem value for that reason. These you can spot the thread between the three of these things. Mm-hmm. We have an ecosystem CI. When we have breaking changes, for example, we try now version 3 onward, we try and make sure that everyone has a backwards compatible, forwards compatible approach. I will go ahead and I'll open PRs to modules, for example, that solve the problem that they might encounter when we do upgrade to that version in advance, because it's very much a case of we need to go together. I don't want to break people's projects. And thankfully, there are tools like Ecosystem CI, which was originally came from the Vite project, which help us do that, help us go together and move together. And I think maybe the fourth thing is our very, very strong value on agnosticism. So we want best practice to be built in, like any meta framework. But we really have a very strong value on letting the user be ultimately in charge. Pick your own KV store, pick your own database, pick your own ORM. Those are all possible to do. Your own image provider, your own deployment provider. That is totally within your control, and we want you to have a good experience on all of that. It really has a downside. The downside is, if you are Next.js and you are targeting Vercel, so you basically have like a node preset which you can run on a VPS, or in a Docker image, or you have Vercel, which has a lot of capabilities as a deployment platform. You can obviously, as a team, spend a lot more time getting those great. But if then you have a Nuxt, and we support 30 deployment providers, and we support, 20 image providers, and we support, so like the number of things we have to support is a lot more. And it's not surprising we are dependent on the community to drive bug reports and pull requests, features and fixes. But I would rather it that way. I would absolutely rather have the control and have the ability to customize stuff. And that means for most people, they don't have to. So that they get the zero config, or they just install a module and it does everything they needed to do. But those are four things.
Yeah, maybe. I like all that. It's such a theme of openness and community and just all those things that, I don't know, a lot, some frameworks can feel closed off, and this kind of feels the exact opposite, besides the fact that you have to use Vue. That's the big one thing, right? Yeah. But Vue's great, so yeah.
Do you know, we do support JSX.
Really?
There's some differences, like you don't use class name, you just use class. But other than that, it might be the JSX that you know and love, except that it will feel a little bit more like solid, because it doesn't rerun in the same way. Like it has a setup function that happens at the beginning and only once, and then after that you could write JSX if you wanted. That site you're deploying to Cloudflare, Wes, that you've been spending all that time on. We should talk. I'll give you a Nuxt version
cool.
of it.
Because I spent all this time moving it from Gatsby to Next.js, and then I got about like 90% of the way through. I'm like, should I have done this on Astro? I hit like 5 or 6 like one of those annoying Next.js bugs where it's just like, well, that's just the way it is. Or like I felt myself screaming, am I the only one that has this problem several times? Oh.
That's the worst place to be, by the way. That's like the worst. You just feel completely I must be doing something very wrong.
Yeah.
Or I'm the only person using
And then I
this.
also had all kinds of like MDX issues all the way down. Like the MDX community or even the Markdown community is very much like I don't know if it's like the UnJS ecosystem, but it's lots of pieces, and you gotta have all the pieces in the right order. Otherwise, things break, and that sucks to debug.
Yeah, totally.
The MDX ecosystem is incredible. So I think it's mostly maintained by Titus.
Yeah.
Worm.
VWORM. Yeah.
And he has so many packages that I'm pretty sure he has. I think he told me he had an automation to manage them, like just to manage working through them and like updating dependencies and releasing them, because there are so many and they interlock and depend on each other in what I'm sure is a beautiful work of art, but a little intimidating if you don't. And this is also a criticism of UnJS as well. If you don't know where something is coming from, having a network of packages that work together can be harder to contribute to or debug if you're new to it. But yeah, like it's the unified ecosystem, right? Like so, it's
Remark,
that's the GitHub
Rehype,
org.
and one more. It's for like it basically all these plugins are abstract syntax trees that you loop over and add exports and remove them, and like some pretty smart people are writing these things. I wrote a couple myself, and I thought, I think I need a computer science degree.
Yeah, same. Yeah, it gets rough. The hardest part is that I think they changed the names of some things around too. So then you get blog posts where things are in different orders, and you're like, which ones am I supposed to use? What's the order? So, Daniel, how do you deal with stuff like that? Given that you're working on a couple of projects that have big old audiences, you got old documentation, you got people like me and Wes who made tutorials about it 5 years ago and are still, giving people the raw, like non-current information. Is there a strategy there to giving people up-to-date docs and making sure that stuff doesn't get in the way?
Do you know this is even more relevant today with LLMs providing information to people
yes, yeah.
drawn from those old tutorials. So, I mean, the thing is that people, and because I think it's true going forward. If you draw a line, even with the creation of or the broad adoption of LLMs, and you say, now going forward, if you're going to change your APIs, the consequences are going to be a lot worse than they have been up until now. Because up until now, it's just been tutorials and your docs. Now it's a limited subset, but now people are learning from LLMs. People are having LLMs write code, their entire thing. So it's not just that they're reading a tutorial and then starting to try it out and noticing immediately that something isn't working. No, they are having an entire project built on the assumption that that's the API. I think basically you have to be very conservative from this point onward about changing any API. And therefore you have to be right the first time, or you have to, when you change the API, you have to change it in such a way that you have a forward and backward compatible approach. So for example, you're very reluctant to change, much more to add. So for example, if you have an option and it's a Boolean, now it also might have a string. And, now it might also have an option, and, but it's going to handle all the backwards. There's like the worst cases, very reluctant to remove them as valid options. So from my point of view, I'm also looking at this from a Nuxt 2 to Nuxt 3 move. And it was the most painful migration you can think of, because it was rewritten. The framework was rewritten. So it was not a move. Also, the framework had to be rewritten. So that there were good reasons for doing that. But at the same time, it was insanely painful. And I know there are people who don't use Nuxt today because they experienced that and thought, there's no way I'm ever risking that again. So right now, well, actually, for quite a while, we've been on the verge of releasing Nuxt 4. We're actually waiting for the major release of Nitro so that we don't have two major bumps in a row. And that's delayed us a bit. But all the breaking changes have been done in Nuxt, and you can actually opt into them with a single flag. And my whole aim for this version bump, major versions in Nuxt are going to be totally semver. In other words, they're only about breaking changes, not about features. So it doesn't really play well with the whole hype-driven development. And people are, it's easy to say, hey, what's new with Nuxt 4? What are the great new things that it's going to offer? I'm afraid it's only going to offer breakage. That's it.
I have a solution for you on that.
Oh, tell me.
You give your devices or your feature releases fancy nicknames. This is the avocado release. This is Nuxt Avocado, and it's incredible. But it still can be Semver. It's just got a fun name. You can get a little
Scott, I think the first one might be the Talinsky release. That's a great idea.
The T0 release.
Rolls off the tongue. Yeah, everybody has no problem saying it or spelling it. Yeah. Yes,
we're going to have the T0 stack. That's going to be the new thing with Nuxt.
Great.
I'll take it.
But basically, I'm spending a lot of my time thinking about this, about breakage, and about how to reduce it, and how to enable people to opt in early to it, and how to provide whether code mods or good error messages or warning logs to help people do stuff like linked docs. There's a lot of DX to be done on this kind of edge, which otherwise would be really, really unpleasant. And I'm not saying that we've got that right so far, but I really want to nail it.
I'm just curious why the design of everything in the Vite, Nuxt, UnJS, this whole ecosystem, all the stuff Ant.Foo does, it seems like everyone's like really good designers. I'm just looking at the Nuxt website, and this blue and green, it makes me want to just use this framework so much.
Yeah.
And is there somebody who works on that, or is it just general good taste?
Lean in, Wes. Lean into what the colors are telling
blue
you.
Is,
just
blue is my color, man. So it's making me want to come in.
So I think there's no one consistent thing. So one, Anthony Fu is incredible, and his design sense is pure self. He has an incredible design sense, and so whenever he creates anything, it is just great, and that's him. Yeah, there's a lot to learn from him about a lot of different things, but that is definitely something. Some of the other things like Vite and Vite had an amazing website for quite a long time. It's been recently redesigned as part of Void Zero, the company. And actually, the designer who did the Vite website also did the Nuxt website. That was actually when he was working at Nuxt Labs. He created, I believe he was the one at the time who designed.
Do you know his name?
The Nuxt website, the Nuxt.com website. His name is Vincent, and I think he is, but on social media, I think you'll find him as the R Moon. If you're on Blue Sky, it's r-moon.bsky.social. And I think it's very, very similar on Twitter.
R Moon, got him.
Ooh, a freelance designer available for projects. Get on this, folks. Wow.
So there you go. Rodriguez, that's his surname. Yeah.
Awesome. I was wondering that. That's good. Thank you.
But I mean, that's not the whole ecosystem. This is one guy, but he has a lovely design sense. I will say that there are some other designers in the ecosystem who just produce some lovely stuff. I've got to say, it transforms. You can write great code, really solid code, does exactly what you want, but someone makes a button that has a shiny edge, and goodness me, it totally changes it. I want to click that shiny button. I don't know. I'm just my lizard brain or something like that. It's the fact that it's good tech is great, but it doesn't take me all the way there. I know I need the shiny button.
Totally.
That's great. We didn't talk too much about Vue, which I think people are going to be mad about because they always say, "Can you please talk more about Vue?" I'm just curious about your opinions in general. Like, why is Vue awesome? Or I assume you're a large Vue proponent.
I am. I love Vue, both Vue. But that was a joke. That was really that was a joke. It was not a very good joke, but you
I missed
that
it.
It was a joke. You chose not to laugh.
I just did it.
Rightly. Yes, that is. There was no impulse to laugh. It was just an experience. So there are several things that you can look at in terms of a framework like this. So one is your experience as a developer in writing it. What is it like? And I think there's some great things about Vue there. So the Vue single file component, if you use that rather than JSX, is a very ergonomic way of writing, because you're writing a bit which is HTML, a bit which is
big fans
JavaScript,
of that. We're a
CSS.
Svelte website over here, so we love that.
It's great. So I particularly think it's really good for people who are new, they've not coded in a JavaScript framework before, and you can say, write some HTML here for me.
Yeah.
Write some CSS for it. Now, of course, these days maybe it's all Tailwind CSS, but I think one of the reasons people have love Tailwind CSS so much is that in a React world, the alternative is a CSS file like alongside it. It's not even in the same file. You lack type safety in terms of your classes, for example, whereas you have all of that in a Vue SFC. Type safety in your classes if you're using modules or even scope styles. And so you have a lot of really nice tooling alongside these three primitive languages of the web. So I think that is a very nice thing. One thing I really like about Vue is, and someone asked me the other day why I thought that Evan was so good at creating projects. Because if you look, he obviously created Vite, he created Vue. I think there are a couple of things there. I think one is he is willing to reconsider things. So he's not satisfied exactly. So Vite, for example, had a total rewrite. Oh, this is my cat. You'll have to see my cat.
All right, yeah.
But
Quick
she
cat
won't let me
break.
talk
I'm into
until
that.
She's requesting, yeah.
Here's Cat. This is Barley.
Oh.
She is very sweet, but she does demand to be petted when the occasion demands.
Yeah.
And so Vite had a full rewrite, really, totally changed its approach and how it worked. And Vue has seen several of those. Actually, in the previous minor release, there was a total rewrite of Vue's reactivity system. Can you imagine that? And there's another one coming.
Breaking.
So there is a library created by Johnson Chu, who was the author of, or is the author of, the language tooling for Vue. Oh, for goodness sake.
I had to
And
move
also
my
just kick her
dogs
out of the room.
into my house, because they were barking right before we were recording this. They're just like, they're guaranteed the moment you press record.
So Johnson created a Vue language tooling in VS Code, also a language server which works in Vim and JetBrains and so on, and also powers other languages like Astro. He abstracted it away into a core library, and he created something called alien signals. Actually, it was originally called native signals, and there was a big firestorm on Twitter that came for him with people saying, "How dare you? This is not the native signal implementation proposed in TC39."
I see. Yeah.
And he was really not meaning, he wasn't pretending that it was, he wasn't in his mind that that's what it meant, but he renamed it Alien Signals. And it powers, I think he needed it for some of what he was doing with editors. And it now has been brought into Vue. And it is, as I understand, the fastest signals implementation of any that are out there at the moment. And so this is about to land probably in the next Vue minor. And I think that kind of thing, like chasing faster performance, better implementation, is something that Evan he does. And I think that is another thing I like Vue for, the idea that it's not afraid to rethink things. Svelte also is like that, right? Because the latest Svelte release that moved much more in the direction of, with runes, for example, and exportable stores. Those are big changes to happen to Svelte. And I think I like that in a framework, the idea that you're willing to rethink things and move in what hopefully you feel is a better direction.
I'm curious, you said you're a full-time open source author. So how do you make money doing that? Or do you?
Ooh, that is important. So yeah, I'm a full-time open source developer, and I'm sponsored. So I have a retainer arrangement with a couple of companies. I have individual people and individual companies who sponsor me, and I do a tiny amount of consultancy as well. But one thing that's very important for me is that all of my sponsorships, there's nothing in return. So I don't have any kind of prioritization of requests or anything along those lines, because for me, open source is about giving. So the reason I enjoy it and value it is because there isn't a monetary value attached to what I do with my time. So I like the fact that people buy into that and say thank you to me and support me. But what I'm very much not wanting is 100 bosses. If I'm that fortunate, I don't have many sponsors. But what I'm not after is like lots of people who are telling me what to do, or people who are wanting, prioritized support, because that's a different world. That's maybe an agency world, but that's. Sorry about this cat.
This is a very persistent cat. Yeah,
she is extremely insistent. So, that's not what I'm up for. So I'm very, very grateful to be. So my main sponsor is Nuxt Labs, for example, but by no means my only one. And I would be doing this if I were not sponsored. So if I didn't have, I would still be. It's what I was doing beforehand. So I'm grateful that I don't have to pursue consultancy to the extent I would have to do otherwise. I'm grateful that I'm set free in terms of time, but it is very important to me that it is not
Totally.
that it's not a directive employment kind of
It's
situation.
really cool that you are like able to do that and to be such a force in the community that you can bring enough people on to obviously support you as a job, but also not have to like shill for something or implement features based on that.
Well, this has been awesome. It's been very illuminating. It just definitely revealed to me just a lot of the confusion I had about some of these things, especially when like you see just such a big ecosystem that you're not a part of. So it's been really awesome to really demystify that. So this is the part of the show where we do sick picks and shameless plugs. A sick pick is something that you're just enjoying right now. Could be anything, podcast, movie, product, whatever. And then shameless plug, anything you want to plug away.
My sick pick is something I came across recently called DeskPad. Don't know if you've heard of that. It is an app on macOS that becomes a monitor. So if you have a large monitor, which I do, not super large, but a bit larger than if I want to share my screen with somebody, I don't want to share the whole of it. Yeah, I often just want to share a part of it. DeskPad lets you do that. So you have basically can drag windows into it. They are on that as a window, and that can be the screen that you share.
It's like a virtual monitor. We were talking about this the other day because
virtual monitor, yeah.
I want to share my screen, but I don't want to share everything on it. I don't want to share a single app because that's also annoying when I want to switch between multiple apps.
Exactly. So I mean, it's true because like Chrome, you can a tab. I'm sorry, that's not good enough. An app isn't good enough because you want the pop-ups on top of it, or if you're streaming, you want maybe the terminal as well as. Anyway, this solves all of that. It's free. It's a great app.
Sick pick. I'm installing it right now.
Yeah, that's my sick pick.
Sick.
And shameless plugs. What would you like to plug to the audience?
My shameless plug. I'm tempted to say, come here and pick up my cat. No, my shameless plug is a course I'm building called React to Nuxt. And the idea is it's going to be for React developers. How do you build stuff in Nuxt? You're a skilled React developer. You know how stuff works. Next.js is second nature. But what do you do if you want to get going with Nuxt? We'll be starting this. It's currently just sign up for to be notified. But if you're interested, I'm going to be starting to produce videos and stream them out to an early cohort.
Nice.
Who will all give me feedback, hopefully, and keep me going in the right direction. So that's coming soon this year.
So we'll put a link to that in the show notes. The domain is react-to-nuxt.com. You can sign up with your GitHub on there, and sick. I'm really looking forward to that.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. That was awesome. Glad we could finally get you on and finally chit chat. This is really fun. Anything else to add, or should we wrap it up?
It's been such a pleasure. Thank you for having me on. It's been a lot of fun.
Awesome. All right. Thank you. Peace.
Happy to have you.